The massive alien ships appeared without warning above Earth's major cities. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, dark metal vessels the size of mountains that blocked out the sun. People stopped in the streets, pointing at the sky with trembling fingers. Car accidents happened as drivers stared upward instead of watching the road. In Washington, D.C., President William Hayes was pulled from a budget meeting and rushed to the emergency bunker deep underground. His security team moved him through concrete corridors as alarms blared throughout the building. Above ground, the alien ship cast its shadow over the White House like a dark cloud. The ships had appeared simultaneously over 12 major cities around the world. London, Moscow, Beijing, Tokyo, New York, all found themselves under the shadow of these enormous vessels. Military bases went to high alert, but their radars showed something impossible. The ships were there, clearly visible to the naked eye, but they registered on sensors as if they were made of empty space. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking down at the blue and green planet below. His tall, gray-skinned form was covered in a uniform that seemed to be made of liquid metal. Behind him, his officers worked at stations that hummed with alien technology. This was routine for them. They had done this hundreds of times before on hundreds of different worlds. "Begin the demonstration," Korath commanded in his native language. His voice was calm, almost bored. 3 large asteroids floating in space near Earth's moon suddenly exploded into dust. The weapons that destroyed them were invisible, striking faster than light itself. The explosions were bright enough to see from Earth's surface, even in daylight. Each asteroid had been larger than a city. Then the transmission began. Every television, radio, computer, and phone on Earth suddenly displayed the same image. A tall alien figure appeared on screens everywhere. Universal translators, technology far beyond human understanding, made his words clear in every language on the planet. "People of the third planet," the alien's voice was deep and carried absolute authority. "I am Admiral Korath of the Valthari hegemony. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire." President Hayes watched from the bunker as his advisors scrambled around him. General Patricia Wells, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was already on the phone with military commanders around the world. Secretary of Defense Michael Brown was reviewing files that contained humanity's most powerful weapons, nuclear missiles that suddenly seemed as dangerous as firecrackers. "Your terms are simple," Korath continued on every screen. "Submit to our authority within 72 hours. You will provide workers for our industrial needs. Your governments will collect tribute to be paid to the hegemony. Your military forces will be disbanded. In return, your species will be allowed to continue existing under our protection." The alien paused, and his next word sent chills through everyone watching. "If you refuse these terms, your civilization will be eliminated. We have destroyed the asteroids near your moon to show you what resistance will bring. This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum." The transmission ended, leaving billions of people staring at blank screens. In London, Prime Minister Margaret Thorne sat in her office, hands shaking as she reached for her tea. The cup rattled against the saucer as she tried to drink. Outside her window, the massive alien ship hung motionless in the sky like a sword waiting to fall. In Moscow, President Viktor Petrov stood at his window, watching crowds of people in the streets below. Some were running in panic. Others stood perfectly still, staring up at the ship. His military advisors were telling him that their most advanced fighter jets could not even reach the altitude where the alien ships floated. Dr. Emily Watson was not watching the broadcast from any government building. She was in a secret research facility hidden in the Colorado mountains, where she had been studying pieces of alien technology for the past 10 years. The fragments had come from crashed probes that the public had never heard about. While the world panicked, she was already working. "They made a mistake," she said to her assistant, Robert Chen, as she examined a piece of alien metal under a microscope. "They think we're primitive. They think we'll just give up." "Aren't we?" Robert asked, looking at the readings on their equipment. "I mean, look at what they just did to those asteroids. Our biggest bombs couldn't do that." Emily smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "That's exactly why they made a mistake. They're thinking like conquerors. We're going to think like survivors." Around the world, the debate began immediately. In the United Nations building in New York, diplomats argued in a dozen languages about humanity's response. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to fight. Many simply wanted to hide and hope the aliens would leave them alone. But in the secret facilities and military bases, in the research laboratories and intelligence agencies, a different conversation was taking place. Humanity had been preparing for this possibility longer than most people knew. Not because they expected aliens, but because they had been finding evidence of alien visits for decades. The 72-hour countdown had begun. On every major news channel, digital clocks showed the time remaining. 71 hours and 37 minutes. 71 hours and 36 minutes. Each second bringing humanity closer to a choice between slavery and extinction. Admiral Korath returned to his private quarters on the flagship. This part was always boring, waiting for the inevitable surrender. In his 300 years of service, he had conquered 4 to 7 different worlds. The pattern was always the same. Shock, fear, desperate attempts at negotiation, and then surrender. He had no reason to expect these humans would be any different. But deep in the Colorado mountains, Dr. Emily Watson was already proving him wrong. 71 hours and 53 minutes after the ultimatum, President William Hayes stood before the cameras in the White House press room. The alien ship still hung over Washington like a dark storm cloud, but Hayes had made his decision. His hands were steady as he looked directly into the camera that would broadcast his words across the galaxy. To Admiral Korath and the Valthari hegemony, Hayes began, his voice clear and strong. We have heard your demands. We have seen your demonstration of power. And we give you our answer. He paused, letting the weight of his next word settle. We will not kneel. We will not serve. We choose to fight. The reaction was immediate. In the alien flagship above, Admiral Korath's officers turned to stare at their commander in shock. No species had ever refused their ultimatum after seeing the demonstration. Not once in 3 centuries. Korath's expression did not change, but his aide could see the tension in his shoulders. Prepare the landing forces, he ordered. Full occupation protocols. These primitives need to learn what defiance costs. Within hours, the skies above Earth cities filled with smaller ships descending like deadly rain. The Valthari drop ships were sleek and fast, carrying soldiers in armor that seemed to absorb light itself. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that could cut through steel like paper. The aliens expected to find cowering populations waiting for conquest. Instead, they found something they had never encountered before. In New York City, construction worker Jack Thompson was waiting with 50 other volunteers in the subway tunnels beneath Manhattan. They had spent the last 3 days preparing, using their knowledge of the city's underground to set traps that no alien database could predict. When the first Valthari soldiers entered the subway system, they walked into carefully planned chaos. Jack's team had rigged construction explosives throughout the tunnels, but that was just the beginning. They had flooded sections with water, then electrified the water using power cables. They had filled air vents with concrete dust that would blind the aliens' advanced sensors. Now! Jack shouted, and his team struck from every direction at once. The Valthari soldiers were trained for conventional warfare. Their armor could stop bullets and energy weapons. But they had no defense against a subway train that Jack's team had sent racing down the tracks at full speed, loaded with explosives and debris. The first alien squad was destroyed in minutes. But more importantly, Jack's team had captured their weapons. Dr. Emily Watson was monitoring the battle from her facility in Colorado. Her screens showed similar scenes playing out in cities around the world. In London, former soldier Anna Mueller was leading civilians in hit-and-run attacks using the city's ancient SOAR system. In Berlin, teenagers were dropping homemade bombs from office building windows onto alien patrols. It's working, Emily said to her assistant Robert. They can't adapt fast enough. She had been right about the alien technology. It was incredibly advanced, but it was also predictable. The Valthari had built their weapons and armor to fight other advanced civilizations that followed logical military tactics. They had no idea how to handle humans who fought like cornered animals. Emily's breakthrough came when she successfully powered up a captured Valthari energy rifle. The weapon was designed to only work for Valthari soldiers, but Emily had found a way around that. She connected it to a car battery and a modified radio transmitter. It should not have worked. The alien technology was far too advanced for such crude modifications. But it did work, because Emily was not trying to understand their technology. She was just trying to break it in useful ways. Send this to every resistance cell worldwide, she ordered, uploading her modifications to a secure network. Show them how to turn alien weapons into human weapons. The war was changing faster than Admiral Korath could believe. His status reports made no sense. How could primitive humans be capturing Valthari technology? How were they modifying weapons that required quantum-level engineering? Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving strange transmissions from the surface. The humans appear to be teaching each other our technology. Korath watched the intercepted broadcasts in growing alarm. Humans were sharing information at incredible speed, spreading knowledge of Valthari weaknesses across their entire planet in mere hours. His forces were fighting not just one enemy, but millions of enemies who learned from each other's successes. In Chicago, mechanic Sarah Davis had just received Emily's instructions over her radio. She was hiding in her garage with 12 neighbors, surrounded by 3 broken Valthari hoverbikes that had crashed in the street. Following Emily's guide exactly, Sarah connected jumper cables from her truck to the alien power cores. The bikes roared to life, their anti-gravity systems humming with stolen energy. Who wants to learn how to fly? Sarah asked her neighbors with a grin that was equal parts terror and excitement. By the end of the first week, the Valthari occupation forces were facing something impossible. Human resistance was not decreasing as casualties mounted. Instead, it was growing stronger. Every captured weapon became 10 human weapons. Every defeated alien squad taught humans new ways to fight. Admiral Korath stood in his command center, staring at casualty reports that defied all logic. His forces were losing ground to an enemy that should have been crushed in days. "How many humans are actively fighting us?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Sir, our estimates suggest, all of them." Korath felt something he had not experienced in centuries of conquest: doubt. These humans were not behaving like any species he had ever encountered. They seemed to become more dangerous when cornered, more creative when desperate. On Earth below, the rebellion was spreading like wildfire. Humans who had never held weapons were building bombs in their kitchens. Children were running messages between resistance cells. Grandparents were teaching teenagers how to set ambushes. The aliens had expected fear and submission. Instead, they had awakened something that would change the galaxy forever: human stubbornness. 6 months had passed since the alien invasion began, and Captain Robert Stone crouched behind the twisted remains of what used to be a shopping mall in downtown Detroit. His team of 20 humans moved like shadows through the rubble, each carrying weapons that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. The weapon in Robert's hands looked like a regular hunting rifle, but Dr. Emily Watson's modifications had changed everything. The barrel was wrapped in copper wire connected to a car battery strapped to his back. When he pulled the trigger, it fired bolts of alien energy instead of bullets. The weapon should not have worked, but it did, because humans had stopped trying to understand alien technology and started breaking it in creative ways. "Target acquired," whispered Lisa Jong, his second-in-command, through the radio headset they had built from stolen alien communication devices. "Valthari command ship, 2 blocks north. Minimal guards." Robert smiled grimly. The aliens were making the same mistake they had been making for months. They could not understand that humans did not fight like other species. While the Valthari expected attacks on military targets, humans went after supply depots, communication centers, and command posts. They struck where the aliens felt safest. The command ship sat in what used to be a parking lot, its dark hull gleaming in the afternoon sun. Around it, only 6 Valthari soldiers stood guard. To alien thinking, this made sense. Who would be foolish enough to attack a ship full of armed soldiers with just 20 primitive humans? "Remember the plan," Robert said into his radio. "We need that ship intact. The information inside could change everything." Dr. Watson had been very clear about this mission. The Resistance needed star maps, fleet positions, and most importantly, the locations of other Valthari worlds. For months, humans had been fighting a defensive war on Earth. It was time to take the fight to the aliens. The attack began with controlled chaos, exactly as humans had learned it to fight. Lisa's team created a distraction 2 blocks away, using modified alien weapons to attack an empty building. The explosion and energy discharge drew 4 of the 6 guards away from the command ship. Robert's team struck from underground, using the city's storm drain system to get within 50 yards of their target. They had learned that Valthari sensors could detect most human technology, but they could not track signals that were bounced through water pipes and electrical systems. The remaining 2 guards never saw them coming. Emily's latest invention, a device that sent feedback through alien communication systems, overloaded their helmet displays with blinding light. The guards stumbled around blind while Robert's team swarmed the ship's entrance. Getting inside the ship should have been impossible. The Valthari used quantum locks that required specific genetic markers to open. But humans had solved this problem the same way they solved everything else: by cheating. Tommy Martinez, a former locksmith from Los Angeles, had spent 3 months studying captured alien security systems. He could not understand how they worked, but he had figured out how to break them. His method was simple and brutal. He connected a dozen car batteries to the lock mechanism and sent massive electrical surges through the system until something gave way. The door opened with a hiss of escaping air. Inside the ship, the Valthari crew was caught completely off guard. Their training had never prepared them for humans who attacked command ships with construction tools and car parts. The ship's captain reached for his weapon, but Robert was faster, stunning him with an energy blast from his modified rifle. "Secure all personnel," Robert ordered. "And find me their computer core." Lisa's team swept through the ship like a hurricane, using tactics that made no sense to alien military doctrine. Instead of clearing rooms systematically, they moved in unpredictable patterns, splitting up and regrouping, creating noise and confusion that overwhelmed the aliens' ability to coordinate a response. Within 30 minutes, the entire ship was under human control. Dr. Watson arrived 6 hours later with her portable analysis equipment. The alien computer core was a crystalline structure that hummed with energy, containing terabytes of information about Valthari operations across the galaxy. "This is incredible," Emily said as data flowed across her screens. "Fleet positions, supply routes, and..." She paused, her eyes widening. "Robert, look at this. Star charts showing Valthari colony worlds. Dozens of them." The information was more valuable than they had dared hope. The Valthari Empire stretched across 4 to 7 star systems, with millions of ships and billions of soldiers. But the data also showed something else: weaknesses. "They spread their forces thin," Lisa observed, studying the fleet positions. "Most of their military is tied up controlling conquered populations on other worlds." Emily nodded, already making calculations. "If we could build ships capable of faster-than-light travel, we could hit their supply lines before they could respond." "Can we do that?" Robert asked. "Build our own starships." Emily smiled, the same expression she had worn when she first started modifying alien weapons. "We have their technology. We have their computer systems. And most importantly, we have something they do not expect." "What's that?" "Human creativity." Over the next 3 months, work began on humanity's first starship. Built in secret facilities across the globe, the ship was a patchwork of human engineering and stolen alien technology. They named it Vengeance, and it looked nothing like the sleek Valthari vessels. The Vengeance was built from the hull of an old aircraft carrier, reinforced with alien materials and powered by modified Valthari engines. Its weapons were Emily's latest creations, energy cannons that used alien power cores but fired in patterns no Valthari computer could predict. Captain David Clark, a former Navy pilot, was chosen to command humanity's first mission beyond Earth. His crew of 12 volunteers knew they might not survive the trip, but they also knew they were carrying something more dangerous than weapons. They were carrying proof that humans could fight back. The launch was conducted in secret from a hidden facility in Australia. As the Vengeance disappeared into the star field, heading toward a Valthari supply depot in the Proxima system, Admiral Korath received a transmission that would haunt him forever. "This is Captain Clark of the human starship Vengeance. We're coming for you." 2 years after the first alien ultimatum, Commander David Clark stood on the bridge of the human dreadnought Retribution, watching the Valthari homeworld burn beneath him. The alien capital cities that had stood for thousands of years were now covered in flames that their own slaves had started. The war had changed completely since humanity's first desperate fights in Earth cities. Now, 43 human starships hung in orbit around the Valthari homeworld, and every one of them had been built from captured alien technology and human stubbornness. "Status report," David commanded, his voice calm despite the destruction below. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, his communications officer, looked up from her station. "The uprising in the industrial districts is spreading faster than we predicted. The slave populations have taken control of 7 major cities. They're using the weapon blueprints we transmitted exactly as planned." David nodded grimly. This had been Dr. Emily Watson's most dangerous idea yet. Instead of just fighting the Valthari military, humanity had done something no conquered species had ever attempted. They had taught rebellion to every enslaved population in the galaxy. The plan had started 6 months ago when human ships began broadcasting across Valthari space. Not military communications, but something far more powerful: instructions. Simple, clear directions on how to build weapons from everyday materials. How to organize resistance cells. How to strike at alien infrastructure in ways that would cause maximum damage. Most importantly, they had broadcast one crucial message: the Valthari could be defeated. On the planet below, former slaves were proving this message true. In the great foundries where the aliens forged their starships, workers had turned industrial tools into weapons. Cutting lasers became rifles. Transportation systems became bombs. Manufacturing robots became soldiers in an army the Valthari had never seen coming. Admiral Korath stood in his personal command center, watching his homeworld destroy itself from within. Reports flooded in from across his empire, each one worse than the last. Rebellions on 17 worlds. Supply lines cut. Military bases overrun by slaves using crude weapons that somehow worked better than they should. "Sir," his aide reported, voice shaking, "we've lost contact with the Centauri colonies. The humans transmitted weapon specifications directly to the slave populations. They've taken control of our fuel processing plants." Korath closed his eyes. In 300 years of military service, he had never faced anything like this. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were destroying the very foundation of Valthari civilization. The breakthrough had come when Dr. Watson realized that the Valthari Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. They ruled through absolute control, keeping their slaves ignorant and divided. But this meant they had never imagined what would happen if those slaves learned to work together. Emily's broadcasts had been carefully designed to spread like a virus through alien communication networks. Each transmission included not just weapon designs, but tactical information. How to coordinate attacks across multiple worlds. How to disrupt alien supply chains. How to turn the Valthari's own technology against them. The effect had been devastating. On world after world, slave populations that had been peaceful for centuries suddenly rose in coordinated rebellion. And they were winning. Lieutenant Commander Robert Stone, now captain of the human cruiser Defiance, watched his tactical display as another Valthari fleet tried to reach their homeworld. They were too late. The human ships had already established orbital control, and more importantly, they had armed the planet's slave population. Incoming transmission from the Valthari fleet, his communications officer reported. "Put them through," Robert ordered. The alien commander's face appeared on the screen, his gray features twisted with desperation. "Human vessels, I am Fleet Admiral Vexthal. I demand to speak with your commanding officer." "You're looking at him," Robert replied calmly. "What do you want, Admiral?" "I want to negotiate terms for our surrender." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the bridge, Robert's crew exchanged glances of amazement. The mighty Valthari hegemony, conquerors of 4 to 7 worlds, were trying to surrender. "I'm afraid it's too late for that," Robert said, gesturing toward the planet below where fires continued to spread. "Your own slaves are deciding your fate now." On the planet's surface, the rebellion was reaching its climax. In the great palace where Valthari rulers had lived for millennia, former slaves had broken down the doors and were destroying everything inside. They used hammers made from alien metal to smash quantum computers. They used stolen energy weapons to melt statues that had celebrated alien victories. Maria Santos, a human engineer who had been captured during the Earth invasion, now found herself leading a mixed group of freed slaves through the palace corridors. She carried one of Emily's modified weapons, a device that looked like a flashlight but could cut through alien armor like butter. "Remember," she told her followers, "we're not here for revenge. We're here to make sure this never happens to anyone else." They reached the central data core, the quantum computer system that controlled the entire Valthari communication network. Maria connected her portable transmitter, another of Emily's inventions, to the alien system. "Dr. Watson," she said into her radio, "this is Maria. I'm in position." Emily's voice crackled back from orbit. "Understood. Beginning final transmission now." The message that went out across the galaxy was simple but devastating. Complete technical specifications for building faster-than-light ships using Valthari technology. Detailed star charts showing the location of every alien military base. And most importantly, a list of every world where enslaved populations were waiting for liberation. Within hours, the message had reached dozens of worlds. Rebellions that had been smoldering for years suddenly exploded into full revolution. The Valthari Empire, built over 3,000 years, began to collapse in a single day. Admiral Korath received the final report as his command ship fled the burning homeworld. Of the 4 to 7 worlds in the Valthari Empire, 31 were now in open rebellion. His military forces were scattered, trying to contain uprisings that grew stronger by the hour. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not just defeated their conquerors, they had inspired an entire galaxy to throw off its chains. As the last Valthari ships disappeared into hyperspace, Commander Clark opened a channel to all human vessels. "This is just the beginning," he announced. "We have a galaxy to liberate." 5 years after Admiral Korath had delivered his ultimatum to Earth, he now knelt in the ruins of his people's greatest temple. The golden walls that had once celebrated 3,000 years of Valthari conquest were now blackened with soot and covered in the symbols of rebellion. Above him, human soldiers stood guard with weapons that had once belonged to his own forces. President William Hayes walked slowly through the destroyed temple, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. He looked older now, worn down by 5 years of the most brutal war in galactic history. Behind him walked Dr. Emily Watson, no longer the excited scientist who had first cracked alien technology, but a woman who carried the weight of an entire empire's destruction on her shoulders. "I must ask you something," Korath said, his voice barely above a whisper. His once proud uniform was torn and stained, his grey skin marked with scars from the final battle. "Why could you not simply submit? Your lives would have been spared. Your species would have survived under our protection." Hayes stopped in front of the kneeling alien and studied him for a long moment. Around them, the temple showed the evidence of the final assault. Blast marks on the walls where energy weapons had fired. Broken statues of Valthari heroes scattered across the floor. The smell of smoke still hung in the air. "Because we're human," Hayes replied simply. "We would rather die free than live as slaves. And once we decided to fight, we fought to win completely." Emily stepped forward, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had spent 5 years turning science into warfare. "The real tragedy is that none of this had to happen. We never wanted to destroy your people. We just wanted you to leave us alone." Korath looked up at her with something that might have been confusion. "But you did not just fight us. You destroyed everything we had built. You turned our own subjects against us. You burned our worlds." "Yes," Emily said quietly. "We did. Because you taught us that there was no middle ground. You gave us a choice between slavery and extinction, so we chose a third option, your extinction instead of ours." The numbers were staggering. Of the 12 species that had made up the Valthari hegemony, only 3 still existed, and they were scattered refugees begging for mercy from the humans who had destroyed their empire. 4 to 7 worlds that had once been Valthari colonies were now free, their populations rebuilding their civilizations with human help. Commander David Clark entered the temple, carrying a datapad with the final casualty reports. "Sir, we've finished the count. Total Valthari military casualties, 800,000. Civilian casualties." He paused, the weight of the numbers heavy in his voice. 12 million. Hayes closed his eyes. The war had consumed entire worlds, turned star systems into graveyards, and left billions dead or displaced. The humans had won, but victory tasted like ash in their mouths. "What about our people?" Hayes asked. "Human military casualties, 400,000. Civilian casualties from the initial invasion and occupation, 2 million. The silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of all who had died. Finally, Korath spoke again. "I have studied your species for 5 years now, trying to understand how you defeated us. We had superior technology, larger fleets, more experience in warfare. How did you do it?" Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, now a full commander and Hayes military advisor, stepped out of the shadows. She had been there for every major battle, from the first desperate fights in Earth cities to the final assault on the Valthari homeworld. "You made one critical mistake," she said. "You assumed we would fight like you. You expected us to follow military rules, to fight for territory and resources. But we weren't fighting for land or power." "Then what were you fighting for?" Korath asked. "The right to exist as ourselves," Sarah replied. "When you gave us your ultimatum, you told us that our choice was to become something else or die. So we chose to make sure you could never force that choice on anyone again." Dr. Watson activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Where once there had been a vast Valthari empire marked in red, now there were dozens of independent worlds marked in green. Each one was a former slave population that humans had helped to liberate. "This is what we built from the ashes of your empire," Emily said. "Not another empire ruled by humans, but a galaxy where every species can choose its own path." Hayes walked to where Korath knelt and looked down at the former admiral. "You asked why we couldn't submit. Here's something else to consider. Why couldn't you leave us alone? You had 4 to 7 worlds, billions of subjects, resources beyond imagination. Why did you need one more planet?" Korath was quiet for a long time before answering. "Because that is what we had always done. For 3,000 years, we conquered and ruled. We never considered that there might be a species that would prefer death to submission." "Well, now you know," Hayes said. "And now everyone in the galaxy knows. The age of empires is over." The final act of the war came when Hayes signed the Treaty of Liberation in the ruins of the Valthari capital. The document was simple: all remaining Valthari forces would surrender unconditionally, all enslaved populations would be granted immediate freedom, and humanity would help coordinate the rebuilding of the liberated worlds. As the ceremony concluded, Emily stood beside Hayes looking out at the stars visible through the destroyed roof of the temple. Somewhere out there, dozens of worlds were starting over, free for the first time in centuries. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Emily asked quietly. Hayes was silent for a moment before answering. "They told us to kneel. We told them no. Everything that happened after that was their choice, not ours." The last transport ship lifted off from the Valthari homeworld, carrying the final human soldiers back to Earth. Below them, the few surviving Valthari began the long process of learning to live in a galaxy where they were no longer masters. The war was over. Humanity had not just survived their test of fire, they had emerged as the reluctant guardians of galactic freedom, forever changed by the choice they had made to fight rather than kneel.